All right, we gotta get going. Sorry that we're dealing with some low light conditions. The sun just sets so fast here. So I'll try my best to take you on day-to-day commute / ride here in my 2009 Civic EXL. So I'll start off with some things that I really like. I would say that it's a really fun vehicle to drive, 1.8, I think 140 horsepower. It doesn't have a ton of power, but it's just a very responsive vehicle. The steering here in the cockpit, I had mentioned that it just feels so comfortable. Having this little car with this tiny steering wheel, very comfortable, leather wrapped, and then the 2-tiered dash, which I absolutely love. The display here, those are all angled towards the driver, so it is a very driver-centric car, which is something that I've noticed for a lot of Hondas and Acuras. It's very responsive, especially if you get the 5-speed manual transmission. Just really fun to throw it into different gears, get those revs really high, because that's what this car is meant to do, and that's how it's meant to be driven. I didn't realize how much I would like the digital speedometer, especially when you're used to using cruise control a lot on the highway. Just really nailing down your speed to the kilometer is really nice on this digital display. The fact that Honda went digital for the speedometer but left the tachometer as analog, I think that was a perfect touch. So with these 8th gen Civics, I know there's a pretty large following, and when it was released in 2006, I think it was car of the year. This is actually the second Civic that I've owned. I mean, the RSX I had in high school. So last year I actually had my hands on the 2012 Civic Si. So that one is a 2.4 liter, making just around 200 horsepower, a little bit less, I believe. The power, I think, was really nice in comparison to this car. Handling was pretty good too, but 2012 was a pretty rough year for the Honda Civic, honestly. They had revamped after this 8th generation, and critics just ripped that car apart. Si wasn't so bad. I mean, it's really similar, still 2-tier dash, and Si was also a lot of fun. But I really wanted to see what this hype around the 8th generation was about. So picked this one up. It's not an Si, but it's still lots of fun. Between the 8th and 9th generation, aside from some aesthetic changes and, Bluetooth, I wouldn't say that it's a whole lot different. Like I was saying earlier, this car loves to be revved high. The power really starts to kick in right around 3,500 RPMs, 4,000 RPMs, and after that. And yeah, I always say, whether it's a car or a motorcycle, driving a slow car fast is so much funner than driving a fast car slow. In the Kia Rio or vehicle like this, the Honda Civic, even the Mazda 3 to an extent, I really love that about this class of vehicle. So another thing that I really like about this car is how well it's aged. I know it's from 2009, we're in 2020 here, and 11 years later, honestly, I still think it's a really great looking car on the road. At the grocery store, I park it, or even when I come home after a day of work or something, when I lock the doors, I still, take a look at the car from the front, from the side, even from the back. I think all the angles, Honda really nailed it, and it has aged very well. Honda really did a great job with the interior here. It doesn't look too outdated to me. I think it looks great. Again, these things do come down to personal preference, but just getting it up to 6,000 RPM, you're not going to break any speed records with this vehicle, but it's not going to be too easy to get tickets. So on the topic of the interior, I really like how it's laid out, but here in the EXL trim, you get a really nice sound system too. I was surprised at, you know, how much bass there is. I think there's a subwoofer. It just says premium audio system. I don't know the brand or anything like that. I just know that it sounds really great. And obviously for the year, I'm not complaining that there isn't Bluetooth. So I did show you that I picked up one of those little Bluetooth receivers on Amazon. And then that goes directly into the auxiliary. And that kind of gives you a workaround for if you want to play things wirelessly, which is nice. It doesn't automatically play, but it is a little bit better than having your phone tangled up. Being a Honda, of course, you're going to get that reliability, but specifically this 8th generation, anywhere between 2006 all the way up until 2011, you don't really see too many major problems. Of course, yeah, there's little things like, you know, this visor in a lot of units, this does come undone. Seems to be fine on this one. I don't have that roof paint peeling issue. I've seen it on a lot of 8th gens, but luckily this one doesn't have it. It does have a timing chain, which of course is a little bit more desired than a timing belt. If you take care of it, you know, drive it pretty responsibly. Aside from oil change, you know, those normal things, changing the brakes, changing out the tires, and especially where I live, you have a set of all seasons or summers, and then you have a set of winter tires. So those tires are going to last you a pretty decent amount of time. What I have found is two-wheel drive, or front-wheel drive specifically, with winter tires is actually better than all-wheel drive with a set of all seasons that aren't that grippy. It's a really reliable vehicle. You know, you're not going to run into any major problems. I'm so surprised at how after 11 years, the heat and the air conditioning just goes like almost instantly. With the Honda Civic, since it is such a popular car, if you are looking for replacement parts, or even if you bring it to a mechanic to get serviced, it is relatively cheap. So there's lots of parts available. For me, for example, I was looking for a set of winter tires that had Honda OEM rims, and that was actually really easy to find. It is a very standard car, and even aftermarket parts. There's like I said, a big following around the 8th generation Civic, so you're gonna find plenty of parts, whether it's OEM, whether it's aftermarket, for this particular car. You know, when I fill up, it's about 35 to 40 liters, and that could stretch me anywhere between 550 kilometers, maybe if I'm doing some heavier city driving, or if I'm just cruising along on the highway on a road trip, that could get me upwards of 700 kilometers in one tank. I've been happy with the mileage. I did take it on a couple of long road trips this year. And yeah, again, on the highway, it's, you know, you don't have to worry about filling up too frequently, unlike the 2015 Kia Rio that I once owned. I found that tutorials and, you know, DIY videos, a lot of them are easily accessed on YouTube, because this car is just owned by so many different people, especially here in North America. So if you are someone who likes to work on cars, or if you're just getting into it, I think this is one of the best cars to start. Target demographic for this vehicle, honestly, if you're just someone who drives to work, even a student in university, even a student in high school, I think this is a really good car because of how cheap it is to own it. It's nice and small for learning and you know, parallel parking and things like that. But at the same time, you can still haul a total of 5 people here. Just so much fun to drive this car. So I'll talk about some of the reasons why I wanted to pick this car up. I mean, it was a pretty good deal when I was shopping around for a Honda Civic 8th generation, but just to kind of go back and talk about my driving history, I started out my first car, that was a 1998 Acura EL 1.6 liter, and I learned how to drive manual on that vehicle. 5-speed manual gearbox, you know, the layout is really similar to this. And, you know, that was just, I bought it at like $164 5,000 kilometers or something like that. $2,000. It was a pretty solid car. And when I was in university, I had a 2005 RSX Premium, blue color. I'll throw a picture up on here. Comparing that car to this car, there are some things about this car that remind me of that RSX. It was technically a hatchback, so when you open up the trunk, you actually lift up the entire rear window, and I thought that was super cool. All the controls slightly tilted towards the driver, similar to the CRZ as well. Even these bucket seats do kind of make me think about that RSX. And then I told you I owned that 2012 Civic Si, which was really fun to drive, that 2.4 liter. I think that's such a great engine. I'm not sure if that's the exact same one as the Acura TSX, correct me if I'm wrong. Just a lot of fun to drive, you know, that round shifter. But I just found that, you know, for a city car, you're filling up a lot. I just needed something, you know, to get to work and go around the city, and because 70-80% of my driving was in the city. So I picked up this one, wanted to see what the 8th gen hype was about, because I had only test driven one many years ago. And when I test rode this one before I bought it, I kind of fell in love with it again, and did a handful of road trips this summer, about 400 kilometers one way out to Abraham Lake. But the big trip that I did this year on it, I drove from Edmonton to Vancouver, which was just under 2,500 kilometers. And I did that trip to Vancouver in one day. So that took about 13 hours in total. And then on the way back, I did that by myself as well. Kind of felt like a kid again, you know, thinking about that RSX. Not even an hour in, I had a Thule bike rack attached to the trunk, just one bike on it. And then I kept getting these issues where the brackets were like getting undone. Multiple bikes on that Thule rack worked just fine. I ended up throwing the bike into the back with the seats folded down. And I was surprised. I was also very lucky that I was able to do that. You know, I had a small frame cyclocross bike. All I had to do was just take the front wheel off, and I was actually able to slide it in with the seats down. You do have to fold both seats down, or all 3 seats down. But it worked in the end. You know, I made it to Vancouver, and then I also made it home with that same method. You know, it's not quite at the Kia Rio hatchback level where you can just throw the entire bike in with the wheels on, but I do wish that there was a little bit more trunk space. I'm actually going to be picking up an office chair. I'll see how that works with the back. Okay, so since I was talking about, you know, throwing a bike in the back, let's just talk about some of the things that I would improve, or maybe some of the things I wasn't a fan of with this vehicle. I know it is the 2-door version, so maybe the 4-door has a bit more room, but I just found that even with the seats down, you had a very narrow opening to work with. So anything like a large and wider box, let's say, you might have some issues transporting something like that. I can't blame the car for that, but space-wise, I think there are other vehicles. Like if there was a hatch version of the Honda Civic, even the CRZ, I think would be a lot easier when it comes to transporting things. The passenger seatbelt started to get really squeaky, and that kind of drove me crazy, because it would only happen when I was driving at certain speeds, and then whenever I would hit a bump, the seatbelt would squeak, and I didn't know what to do to like get rid of that sound. You know, I would have to hold the seatbelt a certain way, and I just kind of wanted to focus on driving. Speaking of squeaks, I do actually notice in the driver's seat sometimes for longer drives, that would start squeaking as well. So it's a very minor thing, not as bad as what I've experienced, like for example in the 2012 Honda Civic Si. Like that seat was just terrible in so many ways, but yeah, just a very minor thing that I wanted to mention. When I was doing that long road trip, I learned a lot of things about this vehicle. Going to Vancouver, I spent like 13 hours in the car, and then on the way back I spent 14. The 2 main things that I learned was, while it is a pretty quiet car, I know it is a 2009, there's a decent amount of road noise, especially if you're going for like 2 hours or more. don't get me wrong, you know, compared even to an economy car like the 2015 Kia Rio, it's not the loudest car, but again, it's not the quietest car. I'm pretty sure the Toyota Corolla would be a little bit quieter than this, but this does come close to being a pretty quiet car. Wind noise is totally fine though in this car. Speaking of highway, on that road trip, I realized I really wish that this had a 6th gear. And the reason for that specifically is when you're on the highway, you're going over 100 kilometers an hour. Even in 5th gear, you're going to be going like 35, maybe 4,000 RPM, which is, you know, it's not terrible, but for me personally, I just don't like when I'm cruising along to have the revs that high. But, you know, that's unavoidable in this vehicle. And especially on my drive, as I was getting closer to Vancouver, there was tons of hills, and even at higher speeds, I would like find myself shifting down to like 2nd or 3rd gear, and the revs would just be screaming, which is like, this car could handle it, but it just was a little bit discomforting for me. So yeah, I mean, of course, it's not going to be the best car for your road trips, but overall, I think it is a very solid car, especially, again, if you're a student, if you're someone that's just commuting, or something to just kind of putt around in the city on. It's a really solid vehicle. So the very last thing that I'm going to mention in terms of like negatives is, again, don't kill me just yet, because I know that it's not meant to be a fast car. However, I still feel like other vehicles still have a little bit more peppiness to them, whether it be the Mazda 3 or, again, the Kia Rio, of that peppiness and quickness and agility compared to this car. But don't get me wrong, this is a really fun car to drive. I just have, you know, a little bit more preference towards Mazda gearboxes. Honda is a very close second. But overall, super reliable vehicle, great on gas, really fun to drive, and I think it looks great both outside and inside. So guys, thank you so much for sticking around till the end. If you've owned or if you've driven a 2009 Honda Civic specifically, or an 8th gen Civic, or any of the other Civics, because they've been around for so long. I have a soft spot for Hondas, definitely cars and motorcycles. Just let me know in the comments below if there's a particular car that you want me to review, and I'll try my best to get my hands on that car. Thanks so much for watching. Hope to see you in the next video. I'll see you then.